In our last video, we went over how the pen tool works, and previously we talked about the differences between Photoshop and Illustrator. So now I just want to walk you through what all of these tools do here on the side. We will talk about all of the other fancy panels later. That'll be the next video. I will show you the workspace I had in the first video and why I use that one and what all those tools do. But for now, let's just start at the top and work our way down. So, to start off with, we have our selection tool, V. You can hit V to get to it. When I just say a key like that, that just means it's a shortcut. So with this bad boy, you can click and drag and select things, or you can just click on an object and it has it selected, and that just allows you to like scale it or to move it, basically do whatever you want with it. I will say though, when you are scaling something, if you just want to scale it and get it like squashed or squished in, that is just fine. If you want to scale it evenly and make sure it stays the same aspect ratio that you originally had it, if you hold down Shift, you can get it to scale very nicely and stay at the same size. Okay, our next one is the Direct Selection tool. And underneath that, if you click and hold on one of these tools, you can see drop-down menus on some of them, only if they have the tiny little arrow on the bottom right-hand corner. So this is the Group Selection tool and the Lasso tool as well. So the Lasso tool and the Group Selection tool sort of function similar to the Direct Selection. Anyway, what this allows you to do is select a single point and then manipulate that one on its own. We talked about it a little bit in our video about the pen tool, but it just allows you to have a little bit more freedom accessing specific points. Now, the Group Selection tool does a very similar thing. It allows you, like, if you're in your normal selection tool, you can hit Shift to grab multiple points and then manipulate them. The Group Selection tool allows you to also do that. You can just click on all of these and then you will be manipulating all of these. Or if you hold Alt while you're in your Group Selection tool, you can select them more individually. And your Lasso tool does a very similar thing, but you can just kind of drag and select like the Lasso tool in Photoshop, and it will select all of those points for you. Oops. The Pin tool, we already talked about that one. Again, it has the Anchor Point tool that allows you to be a little bit more precise with your anchor points. And if that's something you want a little bit more depth with, please go ahead and watch the last video. Same with the Curvature tool. Very similar. I already have talked about it. And that's another thing that's going to be a lot easier for you to understand if you mess with it yourself. I will just leave that object there for demonstration purposes. Another thing you might notice as I'm doing this is that we can have objects floating outside of the artboard space, and that's totally fine. It's not like Photoshop where anything off the canvas no longer renders. You can have things just sort of out in the void, and I like to call that my design graveyard, because when I'm doing designs, if I'm making an iteration and I'm not sure I like something, I will make a copy of it and move it outside and then keep working with it on the main canvas. That way, if I don't like any of the changes I make, I can always go back to what I have and just pull from there. Okay, moving on, we have our whole menagerie of shape tools. So our first one is the Rectangle tool. Pretty simple. You can just drag and drop a rectangle. Hold Shift if you want it to be a perfect square. Same with the Ellipse tool. You can drag out a random ellipse, or you can hold Shift and get a perfect circle. The Polygon tool, very similar. It defaults to being a hexagon, and this one will not allow you to do different shapes. It will always be like a perfect hexagon with all of the sides on the polygon being even unless you manipulate it with the Direct Selection tool. If you want a more specific polygon, you can just click and you can choose the radius of it and how many sides it has. Let's see what the max is, just for fun. It's probably like 90 or something. Oh, it's just letting me do it. That is more or less a circle though, and I think the minimum is a 3. I'm curious actually. Let's see how high we can go. Oh, it'll just let me keep adding sides. Well, that's the beauty of Illustrator, I guess. Oh, it stops at 1,000, so there's your answer. Moving on, we have the Star tool. Very similar. It just makes a star type polygon. And again, you can change how many sides it has. 3 is just a triangle, but that's about as low as it will go. We can do like an 18-point star though. So that's pretty nice. The next one is the line segment tool. And here we don't want to have a fill, we want to have a line segment. As you can see, as I had that selected, it flopped the fill and the stroke profile. So pulling this out, we can just get a nice and even line. And I'm just going to leave all of these random shapes here so we can mess with them going forward, and I can kind of demonstrate stuff using that. Okay, our next tool is the brush tool. So how the brush tool works is you basically just make a shape with this brush tool. So if we select this, we can kind of see it is a line that is just a bunch of different curves, kind of like a Bezier curve, but a lot more, it's a lot harder to control. You're just like freehanding it. It can be useful. I don't prefer to use it because, again, Illustrator isn't really made to paint in. The Blob brush tool, on the other hand, a similar effect. However, instead of being a stroke like the way this one is, where you can see it has these lines clearly defined and then the stroke outside of it, this is just a shape. So all of the edges of this line have been defined, unlike this one where it's just the center one and you can change the stroke. So what I mean by that is if we go here, see this little stroke thing in the profile, we can mess with that and it will change the line. Now you can't do that with the Blob brush because everything here is one shape. But the nice thing is if we paint over it again with the Blob brush, it should be the same shape. Yep. I will delete those, however, because they are a little ugly. The pencil tool, very similar, just no stroke. You can go ahead and add one here if you would like, just like that, and boom, you've got a stroke. Our next one is the type tools. So if we just have a normal type tool, you can either just click and it will give you a little text box to work with, or you can click and drag, and that way you can manipulate that and get it into spaces that you want, and it works a lot more like a paragraph. So it's basically, if you want a title, you should just click it, and if you want to do a whole block of text, click and drag. Our next one is the Type on Path tool. So what this allows you to do is type on a predefined path. So if we click this, non-masking path, if we click that, you will see that it just fills in the text all around our weird little shape. So you can't click on the middle like I did before, you have to click on the path itself. So then you can manipulate sort of where that starts, where it ends, how much space you have for it. So that can be pretty neat. You can do like just nice curves with it. You can make weird shapes like this one. Our next one is the vertical type tool. Very similar to the normal type tool, it just goes vertically instead of horizontally. And again, you can click and drag that one as well. And if you're curious, this lorem ipsum that I've got going on here, that is just a filler text that is used in graphic design kind of across the board. One thing you will notice, however, is the vertical type tool, it does read right to left instead of left to right. So if you're like doing something, I believe Japanese is one of the languages that is right to left and up and down. So if you're doing different scripts besides like English, this can be a really important tool. Again, in this whole paragraph thing right here in the properties menu, you can see a whole bunch of different things, and you can make a lot, you can mess around with them. All of these things are going to be a lot like you would see in a normal like Word document. So like your paragraph alignment, if it justifies or not, how much space it takes up. You can make it justify across the whole space. You can make it align to the bottom, top, center, whatever you want. That also gives you the option to change the font if you would like. You can change it to any of the weird fonts I've got here. Make it completely illegible if you want to. All that good stuff that you can do with any other word editor. Alright, so our next one is this rotate tool. So how this works is it just, again, allows you to rotate things. There's also other different ones. So we're going to start with this hexagon here. If you have something selected, that's an important part, you can just click it and drag it and rotate it however you want. Same goes for the scaling. Again, hold shift if you want it to stay justified. I believe it is snapping to things here, which is why it's not staying the same. And then your reflect tool, it'll reflect off of this little cyan axis. So if we just, you can click to put that axis anywhere and then click again and it will reflect it. It's kind of hard to see on the hexagon though. Let's do that with our Apple logo that I still have here. Again, if we can just click there in the middle and then click it again, you can see it reflects based on where your cursor is and where that center point is. If that's a little bit confusing and not quite accurate enough for you, you can also just select this with your normal tool, right click on it and go to transform and then choose reflect, and you can get much nicer, more controllable axes and angles going on here. Cool. So our next one is the Shear Tool. Very similar. Again, we also have to have the object completely selected before we use one of these tools. This just allows you to skew it basically however you want to. And all of these things underneath this tool set right here, the rotate and all of these other ones, can be accessed through just your normal selection tool, right-clicking, going to transform. Okay, moving on. Our next one is the eraser tool. It functions just like the brush tool. It just removes parts and makes it two separate objects. Our other one in there is the scissor tool. So if we have a line like this one, we can just click on that and it has cut it for us into two separate lines. Our next one is the shape building tool. Now this one can be a little confusing and will definitely need some experimentation on your part, but if we just take a couple of circles, say, and just overlap them a little bit, we can go ahead and take our shape builder tool right here. Here, let me select both of these first. Take your shape builder tool, click on that, go back to your normal selection, and you can pull that out, and they were all different shapes now, or, no. Okay, perfect. Select that again. Your shape builder tool, you can just click on that. And then as you can see, there's, again, two separate ones. It just basically allows you to do all the stuff the Pathfinder tools do, but a little bit more fluidly if you get used to using it. That's the sort of tool that I would recommend that you play with on your own. And if you're confused about what the pathfinding tool is, I will show you when I get to all of my fancy windows. And the next one we have is the gradient tool. This one's pretty self-explanatory. You can just click on something and it will change your fill from solid to gradient. You could also make it work for your strokes, and there's a bunch of different types here. Do radial gradients, free transform gradients, which are a little funky. Basically, it'll just, you can add a separate point and it will go from the two colors. So that can be very interesting for big areas and whatnot. And if you click on these, you can change the gradients and all that. We'll just go ahead and leave that. That looks kind of like an orb. Our other option is underneath the gradient tool. Hold and click that. We can pull up the mesh tool. Now this is an interesting one. If you're familiar with 3D modeling, then the concept of a mesh might be a little bit more familiar to you. If not, a way you could think about it is just cutting your area into a grid and then kind of using that to make it look more 3D. So what we could do is we could add 2 points to this rectangle, select one, and change the color. Actually, let's make this a different one so we can kind of see it a little more easily. If we just select the whole thing, we can change the entire color. Okay, now back to our direct selection. We're going to choose one of these gradient points, and we're going to make it a lighter shade of red. Or I guess that one's more orange. Anyway, and then on this one, we can make it like a darker, more magenta-y red. Cool. Now, if we can go ahead and manipulate these just like we could any other path. So we can select that. It has handles, so you can give it a curvature if you'd like. You can just select the point and drag it. But this is a very interesting way to make your object look a little bit more 3D. As you can see, it's a little bit more, it has a little bit more volume to it than your typical gradient will. This is, again, another tool that I recommend you mess with a little bit, because it's going to make a lot more sense for you to use it and figure out how it works just through a hands-on than it will be through me explaining it. But that's a pretty simple overview. Again, I don't want to get too complex because some of these tools can get very intense. Our next one is the Eyedropper tool. So if we have a thing selected, let's say like this oval right here, if we take our Eyedropper tool and grab this, you'll see it can turn directly into that, that color. And it'll take gradients too. It won't take meshes, but it'll take like whatever color you select off of this, just because meshes are a little bit more complicated. An interesting thing too is if we have like a block text like this, and we have them in different fonts. Let's say this one is audio wide. Perfect. And this one is myriad. Okay. So we can take our audio wide one and select our myriad font, and you can see it will change exactly into what the other one is. And that not only applies to fonts, but also like sizes and everything. So it basically doesn't just take the color of something that you select, it takes all of its properties as well. So if you have a, say, like if we have our apple right here, and we select our star, it will just take the stroke profile, which leads us into the width tool. Now what this does is allow you to change the stroke width a little bit more dynamically. So what that's going to look like here, let me increase the stroke so it's a little more obvious. If you take one of these and you click and drag, you can increase or decrease. Oh, should be able to decrease this. Basically, you can manipulate what your stroke profile is a little bit more dynamically. So here we go. That'll allow you to decrease it. And it will make a very nice and smooth interpretation between all of them. So you can still have, so it looks a little bit more like nice brushwork. And I mean, obviously this little thing right here is not the prettiest, but you can get some very interesting effects with this. And if you're doing an actual illustration, it can be a really nice way to get your line works to have different stroke profiles. Go ahead and revert that one. Okay, the blend tool is a little funky. But basically, say we have this star. Let's put another one all the way up here. And we get these out of the way. This is one of those tools that is very complicated, and I do not think we have time to go into just because I don't want to overwhelm you. But we should be able to. See, just a little bit of messing around with it. You can get it to like blend in between these two objects. So theoretically, if we had like a star here and like a hexagon here, we should be able to get some sort of in-between shape. There we go. So it's kind of like tweening an object between each other. That's something, again, if you mess around with it, you'll probably get a little bit better of a sense of how it works. And I know there's other things you can do with it similar to the mesh tool, but again, I do not want to overwhelm you. So moving on, we also have the Artboard tool. Now what this allows us to do is just change the size of our canvas, basically. It also allows us to make another one. So if we hold Alt, we can just drag this bad boy off and make another one. Or out in the void, we can just drag and drop, and we have another artboard. And then the next one is just your standard pan zoom tool. So you can just click and drag to zoom in and out, or you can click to zoom in. And then our other ones are the hand tool. Again, you can do this by holding spacebar. It just allows you to pan around, or the rotate tool. And this just rotates your entire canvas, and it'll tell you what degree it's rotating at, which is super nice. And you can hold Shift to go back to snap to like 30, 45, 60, 90, 0 degrees. All right. In the next tutorial, I'm going to revert my workspace to what I had it at before and just sort of go through some of the windows and the like interesting other tools that I use often.